The iron gate burned when she touched it. Not heat from the sun, not friction. Something beneath the metal, alive and specific, like a pulse that recognized her before she recognized it. Sable pulled her hand back. The soldiers behind her didn't notice. They were watching the cliff city rising out of the fog ahead, Ashgrave, carved into black rock, open to whatever sky it wanted. The kind of place that didn't ask permission. She had spent 26 years learning to be invisible in places that wanted her gone. One more should not feel different. It felt different. Her hands were not her own. Somewhere inside those walls was the man who held her life in his hands without knowing her name. The Alpha King. A blood oath sworn on his own wolf. A law that made her existence a crime on his territory. Her body had already decided something about him. Her body was wrong. The gate opened. The iron groaned along its hinges, and in the half-second before the sound died, she felt it again. Warmth without fire. Recognition without memory. A pull so precise it frightened her more than the soldiers, more than the walls, more than the name they kept saying in low voices like weather coming. Caelum Dray. She stepped through. The gate swung shut behind her like a held breath. Finally, released. The two wolves at her door were afraid. Sable knew the difference between caution and fear. Caution was how border wolves always arrived. Hood up, no rank markings, one hand free. Fear was something else. Fear was the way the taller one kept checking the tree line, the way neither of them would step fully onto her porch. She held the door open anyway. Come in or don't. They came in. The shorter one spoke fast. A half-blood had been found inside pack territory overnight. Not her. Someone else. Male, young, unconscious near the eastern ridge with a sealed message cylinder in his coat. The Ascendancy was running sweeps. Her name wasn't on a list yet. She had perhaps 1 hour before patrol reached this section of the border. 1 hour. We're not supposed to be here, the taller one said. You're not, Sable agreed. Thank you. She had the door closed and her hands moving before they reached the tree line. She had done this before. That was the important thing to hold on to while her fingers worked. Anything that named her went into the false floor panel beneath the work table. The iron press seals, the half-blood registry documents her mother had kept. The careful written record of every wolf she'd treated and how. Not because the record was incriminating, because it contained names, and names were weight she refused to put on anyone else. The remedies stayed. All of them, labeled in plain script. Fever breaks, wound washes, pain compounds, a neutral herbalist serving border settlements. That was the story. The story had to be clean. She worked without noise. The marsh outside was gray-white with morning fog. Water moved somewhere beneath the stilted floor. Slow, iron dark, indifferent. Why, she had built this place from salvage over 4 years. Crooked shelves. One window that stuck in rain. A work table scored with 1,000 small cuts from 1,000 careful tasks. Don't be sentimental about a table. She packed one bag, the satchel she always carried. Remedies, tools, 2 changes of clothing. Enough to leave with, enough to work with. She had learned early not to own things she couldn't carry. The patrol arrived in 40 minutes, not 60. She heard them before she saw them. Too many boots, too deliberate. Border wolves moved with the marsh. Quiet, water soft. These moved like they owned the ground, which meant they did. She opened the door before they knocked. There were 5 of them. 4 soldiers in ranked formation. Iron gray shoulder markings she recognized as senior unit. And in front, not a border wolf. Not even a standard patrol commander. The beta of the Ironmore Ascendancy. He was broad through the chest, somewhere in his late 30s, with a face that had seen border conflicts and not been improved by them. He looked at her the way people looked at a calculation they were running twice to be sure. Sable Ashford, he said, not a question. Yes, she said. You're being brought to Ashgrave for questioning regarding last night's incursion. He held out a formal detainment notice. Paper, ink, sealed with the Ascendancy mark. Everything in order. Everything correct. Investigative exception to border jurisdiction. You'll be treated as a person of interest, not a combatant, provided— I understand the decree, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, recalibration. Then you'll understand this isn't optional. She took the notice. Read it in full, every line, while he waited. The soldiers did not move. The fog pressed against the window glass. Everything in the document was precise. Whoever had drafted it knew the legal framework exactly. Not just the decree, but the narrow exceptions carved inside it. This was not routine escalation. Someone had made a careful decision to bring her in and covered the mechanism with paperwork. She folded the document and put it in her satchel. I'll need to lock the door, she said. He nodded once. She locked the door. She did not look back at the work table, the crooked shelves, the window that stuck in rain. The transport was a covered wagon with iron-reinforced sides. Functional. Not cruel. The beta sat across from her for the first hour and asked 7 questions, each one precise, each one about the trespasser. Did she know him? Had anyone contacted her in the last week? Had she seen unusual movement along the eastern ridge? She answered honestly, because honest answers to the wrong questions revealed nothing. He was watching her hands when he asked the last one. She kept them still. After an hour, he moved to the front bench and didn't return. The soldiers were quiet. The fog thinned as the marsh gave way to firmer ground, and then to the long approach road that cut toward the iron ore cliffs. She watched through the gap in the covering. The cliffs appeared first as shadow, then as mass, then as something vast and specific. Rust red and gray-black banded stone, sheer-faced, carved by wind and iron mineral water into shapes that looked almost intentional. Ashgrave grew from the cliff face the way a hand grows from a wrist. Inevitable. Continuous. The kind of architecture that said, "We have always been here. You have not." The transport slowed at the outer gate. Iron. Old iron, dark and dense, set into the cliff face on hinges the size of her torso. The gates swung open. She felt it the moment they passed through. A warmth from the hinges, sourceless and specific, moving up through her palms like something recognizing her. There and gone. Half a second. She looked at her hands. Nothing. Herb-stained fingers. Steady pulse. She filed it under exhaustion, under stress, under the long night and the cold transport and the particular way fear wore on a body when you refused to let it show. The gates closed behind her. She was wrong about all of it. The room had no roof, and Sable didn't know where to put that information. Stone walls, iron sconces, a floor of leveled cliff rock, unfinished, still bearing the grain of the mountain it had been cut from. And above, open sky, pale morning gray, a rectangle of cloud moving slowly across the gap, like something deciding whether to stay. She had been placed in the center of the floor. Not roughly, precisely. The beta had indicated the spot with one hand, and she had stood on it because the alternative was worse. 4 soldiers at the walls, a gamma she didn't recognize near the far door, a woman in her late 30s with the kind of stillness that came from training rather than temperament. No alpha. The door at the far end opened. He was mid-sentence when he entered, when speaking to the gamma over his shoulder, a document in one hand, unhurried, and then he turned and saw her. The room changed. Sable heard it before she understood it. A tone. Low, sourceless, resonating from every iron surface simultaneously. Sconces, door hinges, the clasps on the soldiers' jackets. Not loud, precise, like a string pulled taut and plucked once by something that knew exactly what note it wanted. Every wolf in the room went still. The alpha stopped walking. 1 second, maybe 2. His face gave nothing, and that, she would think about later, was its own information. A man whose face gave nothing had practiced giving nothing, which meant something had arrived that required the practice. He crossed the remaining distance to the stone throne. Sat. set the document on his knee. Your name, he said.
Sable Ashford. Border District herbalist.
Not a question.
He had been briefed on the basics then. You were detained this morning under investigative exception, border jurisdiction, regarding the incursion at the Eastern Ridge.
Yes.
Do you know the man who was found?
No. He asked 9 more questions. She answered each one. His voice was level throughout, unhurried, deliberate, a voice that had learned to move at the speed it chose, rather than the speed the room demanded. The soldiers remained still. The Gamma took notes. He has not looked at her directly once. She noticed it the way she noticed the tone in the iron. Catalogued, filed, not yet understood. Every question came at a point slightly left of her face. Every pause landed a half-second long. His right hand, resting on the document on his knee, had not moved since he sat down. She was a herbalist. She knew what a body did when it was working to stay neutral. That hand was working. The decree classifies your presence in pact territory as a border violation, he said. I'm aware. The investigative exception permits your detainment for up to 30 days pending review. He paused. You'll be housed in the mid-compound, not a cell, a room. Another pause, the half-second kind. The investigation requires access to your knowledge of border movement patterns. The Gamma's pen stopped. The Beta, near the wall, made no sound. But Sable had been reading rooms since she was 9 years old, and something in the Beta's stillness shifted. A recalibration, the same as yesterday at her door. The Alpha had just made a decision that was not in the briefing. The Gamma recovered first. My lord, the standard protocol for... I know the protocol, Vesra. His voice didn't harden. It simply closed the sentence. Border movement intelligence is relevant to the investigation. She stays until the cylinder's contents are fully analyzed. Vesra said nothing more. Sable's chest had done something she didn't have a name for. A pressure low and specific. Not pain, not the absence of pain. Something new. She had inventoried every plant compound she'd ever processed, and none of them produced this. The Alpha rose. He was taller than she'd registered from the center of the floor, broader, with the particular gravity of a man whose body had been built for the work he did, rather than how it appeared. The scar along his jaw caught the gray light from the open ceiling and disappeared into shadow. He walked toward the side exit. He would pass within 4 feet of her. He did not slow. He did not speed up, and in the precise moment he passed her, in the half-second of proximity, every iron sconce in the room brightened. Not the flame, the iron itself. A dull copper-orange warmth, sourceless, 1 full breath long. Every soldier felt it. She saw it in their shoulders. The Alpha walked through the door and did not look back. The room exhaled. The Beta crossed to her in 4 strides. You'll be taken to your quarters now. Professional, clipped. His eyes held a question he wasn't asking. She nodded. The room they gave her was mid-compound, as promised. Stone walls, an iron-framed bed, a work table below a deep-set window that looked out over the marsh horizon, fog still thick above the black water. The soldiers left. The door was not locked. That was deliberate, too. She stood at the window for a long moment. The iron frame was warm beneath her fingers. Not the warmth of stone that had absorbed body heat. The other kind. The kind she'd now felt twice. She pressed her palm flat against it. What are you? The warmth faded slowly. 30 seconds. 40. Until the iron was just iron again. Cold, indifferent, old. She took her hand back. She opened her satchel. Set her tools on the work table in the order she always used. Compounds left, instruments right. The small knife she used for root work nearest her dominant hand. Familiar weight. Familiar sequence. She did not have the luxury of the thing she'd felt. She had a work table. She had her hands. She started there. The document was 14 pages long, and Vesra set it on the work table without preamble. Your official status under Ascendancy jurisdiction. she said.
You have the right to read it in full. Sable did not touch it immediately. She finished grinding the compound she was working. A fever reducer. 3 border settlement children had it. The beta had relayed the request through Vezra without comment, and wiped her hands on her apron before she picked up the first page. Vezra waited near the door. She always waited near the door. In 3 days, Sable had learned the shape of her. Vezra answered direct questions with direct answers, and deflected everything adjacent. She brought what was requested, removed what was finished, and carried her own counsel in both hands at all times. She was not cruel. She was not warm. She was a woman doing a precise job with complete attention. And Sable respected that, even when it made the room feel smaller. She read the first page, the second. The language was old, formal, the kind of legal construction that had been copied and recopied until the original intent had calcified into architecture. Enemy combatant, detained under investigative exception, border jurisdiction. She had known the decree in outline since childhood. Her mother had explained it the way mothers explained weather, as something that existed independently of anyone's preference for it. Stay outside. Stay invisible. Stay useful in ways that don't require them to see you. Reading the full text was different. The blood oath clause was on page 9. She read it twice, a third time, slower. The Alpha King of the Ironmore Ascendancy binds this decree in perpetuity through blood oath to his wolf. The oath to endure for the length of his reign, the wolf forfeit upon its violation. Not a metaphor, not ceremony. The wolf itself, the living animal half of him, the thing that made an alpha what he was, as collateral for the law's permanence. She set page 9 face down on the work table. Don't. The pressure in her chest from the throne room had a shape now. Precise, documented, irreversible. She could trace its edges with both hands and understand exactly what it was and exactly why it could not be anything. Her father had been a Gamma. He had loved her mother against pack law, and they had taken his wolf by degrees. Not all at once, but in the slow way that was worse, the way that looked like a man aging badly, until one morning he didn't wake up. 4 years. She had been 11 at the end of it. She knew what the forfeit looked like in a body. She had watched it. She picked up page 9 and kept reading. Vezra had not moved from the door. The investigative exception permits detainment, she said. But not indefinitely. After 30 days? I understand the timeline, Sable said. I thought you might want to know it explicitly. Sable looked up. Vezra's expression held something that wasn't sympathy. Something more careful than that. Professional acknowledgement, maybe. That the situation was what it was, and the person inside it had the right to see it clearly. The blood oath, Sable said. Has it ever been challenged? Vezra was quiet for 2 full seconds. Not successfully. 3 floors above, in the strategy room, Caelum spread the cylinder's contents across the table and counted names. 31. His beta, Rowan, stood across from him. They had worked together since they were 17, since before the title, since the lower keep. Rowan did not require instruction on when to speak. The bond notations, Caelum said. Coded, but legible once you have the key. Rowan set a separate sheet beside the list. Each name carries a bond status. Mated, unmated, bond strained, bond suppressed. He paused. Someone has been watching which of your wolves are most vulnerable through their pairs. Caelum's hand was flat on the table. Still. A fracture campaign, he said. It's not military architecture. It's emotional. Break enough bonds, the pack biology destabilizes from inside. Roan's voice stayed level. This took time. Well, months of observation, minimum. Whoever built this list has had access to the compound. The unexpected turn arrived quietly, buried in Roan's next sentence. There are 31 names, Roan said. Yours is not among them. Caelum did not move. They already know the alpha has no active mate bond to fracture. Roan held his gaze. Or they did, until 2 days ago. The room held the weight of that. Neither man said what sat at the center of it. "Find the source," Caelum said. He left before Roan could respond. He was at her door 12 minutes later. He did not knock hard. 2 measured raps, and when she opened it, he stood in the frame with the formality of a man who had chosen his position in a room before entering it. "The trespasser," he said. "Did he carry anything when he came to you previously? Any object? Any message?" She held the door half open. "He never came to me." "You're certain? I keep records." A pause, the half-second kind. His eyes moved briefly to the work table behind her. The compound work, the 14-page document, page 9 face up again because she had gone back to it. His jaw tightened once. He did not ask about the document. "Thank you," he said. The words were correct and cost him something. He turned and walked the corridor without hurrying. Sable stood in the open doorway and watched the hinge. It glowed the moment he rounded the corner. The dull copper-orange warmth, sourceless, spreading from the old iron in slow pulses like something breathing. She had stopped cataloging it as stress. She had stopped cataloging it as anything she had a word for. She counted. 30 seconds. 35. The warmth held longer than it had in the throne room, longer than the gate, as though proximity was accumulating into something that needed more time to clear. At 40 seconds, it faded. The iron went cold. She understood the decree in full now. She understood the oath and what it held, and exactly what acknowledgement would cost the man who had just stood in her doorway asking about a trespasser his beta could have asked about instead. She went back to her work table. She turned page 9 face down again and did not turn it back. The fever compound needed a second grind. She picked up the pestle and gave it one. Vezra came in without materials, and that was the first wrong thing. Every previous visit had an object. Compounds, documents, a request relayed from somewhere above. Today, her hands were empty. She sat in the chair across from the work table without being invited, which she had never done, and she set her palms flat on her knees like a woman bracing for something she had decided to do before she talked herself out of it. Sable set down her work and waited. "I want to tell you something," Vezra said. "Not as the gamma assigned to your detainment." A pause. As someone who has held this post for 11 years and watched what happens when people don't have the information they needed earlier. Sable said nothing. She had learned that Vezra's silences were not invitations to fill them. "You read the blood oath clause," Vezra said. "Yes." "Then you understand the legal mechanism." Vezra's voice was precise, measured, the same register she used for everything. "What the document doesn't describe is the biological one." She told it plainly. No softening, no ceremony. A broken blood oath didn't strip the wolf in a single moment. There was no clean severance, no visible wound. It retreated. Over months, in stages. The way a tide went out so gradually you didn't notice the waterline had changed until the rocks were bare. The alpha would feel it first in the pack bond. A dulling, like sound heard through walls instead of open air. Then the instincts, the physical edge, the particular quality of attention that made a wolf different from a man in a body. At the end of it, the man remained. The wolf did not. "It isn't death," Vezra said. "It's reduction, a permanent narrowing." She paused. "I have seen it once. A beta, 2 reigns ago, who violated an oath of loyalty." Her hands tightened once on her knees. "He lived another 30 years. He was never the same animal." She is telling me this because she has seen the hinge glow. Sable kept her hands flat on the work table. The herb staining on her fingers had gone a deep mahogany overnight. She'd been working with iron root, which ran dark and permanent into skin. She did not move them. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Not a question. A check. "Because you have the document," Vezra said, "but not the full picture. And you strike me as someone who makes better decisions with the full picture." She left shortly after. The door hinge did not glow. He was not near. The room was just a room. Sable sat with the full picture for a long time. Her father had been a gamma. She had watched the reduction. She knew the specific texture of what Vezra had described. The way a man's eyes changed when the animal in him was going. The way he moved more carefully, as though he no longer trusted the ground. She had been 11 when it finished. She had held his hand and felt the moment the last of it left, and it had felt like a door closing on the wrong side of a wall. She would not be the reason for that. Not again. Not ever. She picked up the pestle. She worked until her hands stopped remembering.
3 floors up, Caelum's strategy room held the gray light of pre-dawn and 2 men who had been awake through all of it. Roan set a name on the table. Eli Vorn, Eastern Border, Gamma Rank. 4 years in compound rotation, currently assigned to supply line oversight. Caelum read the dossier without touching it, arms crossed, standing at the edge of the table the way he stood at the edge of everything. Close enough to act, far enough to think. He doesn't have clearance for the Bond archive, he said. No. Roan sat back. But his immediate supervisor does, and his supervisor's mate is on the list. The room absorbed this, a leveraged access chain run through a bond already under strain. Elegant, in the way that ugly things were sometimes elegant. He's not the architect, Caelum said. No, only he's Eastern Lord blood on his mother's side, 3 generations back. Old enough to be a flag, not recent enough to be a coincidence. Roan paused. Someone activated him, someone with a longer view and access to the Bond Map Foundation data, which means compound access going back. Years, Caelum said. Roan said nothing. Caelum moved to the window. The marsh was invisible in the dark, but he knew its shape from 20 years of this view. The black water, the sideways trees, the fog that never fully cleared. He had stood at this window the night his father died. He had stood here the week after, when the lower keep was still being dealt with, and understood that the title was now his, and the world had not changed shape for that. He made the oath for you, Roan said, quietly. Your father. Not a revelation. They both knew it. But Roan said it the way you named things in the dark sometimes, to make sure they were still solid. He made it to protect the pack, Caelum said. He made it because someone told him it was the only way to hold the Eastern Lords in line after the ambush. Roan's voice held no judgment. And then he died before he could find another way? Caelum's hand was on the window frame. Iron. Cold at this hour. I have missed my wolf for 3 years, and I have not told a single person. He did not say it. Roan had known him since they were boys in the same training yard. Neither of them needed the words for what they both already carried. Find the architect, Caelum said. Not Eli, whoever is above him. In her workroom, 2 floors below and a world away, Sable's hands stopped. Not her decision. They simply stopped, the pestle going still mid-grind, because something had arrived in her chest that did not belong to her. An ache. Low and specific. The particular quality of a stretched thing. Not breaking, not broken, but pulled past the point of comfort and held there. She pressed her hand flat to her sternum. It wasn't physical. It had no source in her own body. No compound she'd touched. No fatigue she could account for. It was external, and it was structural, and it was coming from somewhere inside the compound walls, with the steady insistence of a signal she hadn't known she could receive. She did not know what a fracturing mate bond felt like from the outside. She catalogued the sensation under illness, fatigue, the accumulated cost of a week inside stone walls without marsh air. Her hands resumed their work. She was wrong. No, and somewhere in the dark above her, the bond mapping list had 31 names on it,
and none of them were hers. Not yet. Nobody told her what to wear, and that was the first mistake. Vezra had delivered the assembly notice the evening before. Mandatory attendance, all compound residents, open sky throne room, dawn. She had said nothing about dress. Sable had nothing to dress in beyond what she owned, which was what she'd arrived in. The earth-brown linen wrap, the worn leather apron left behind in her room, the canvas satchel because her hands needed somewhere to be. She arrived with the compound staff and stood where the beta indicated, mid-floor, left of center, clearly marked as detainee present under exception by the single-ranked soldier positioned at her left shoulder. The room filled around her. Wolves of every rank, and some she recognized from corridor sightings. Most she didn't. They took their positions by hierarchy, senior ranks forward, support staff rear, soldiers flanking. They noted her. She felt it without returning it, a compound awareness, the way you felt weather-changing pressure before the rain arrived. Caelum entered last. He did not look at her. She had expected that. What she had not expected was how much the room changed simply from his presence in it. A shift in collective posture, a settling, like a held note finally resolving. He doesn't know the room does that when he enters. The assembly ran procedural for 20 minutes. Supply reports, border patrol rotation, a trade agreement with the northern settlements read into record by Roan, who delivered it with the same effect he used for everything, factual, forward, done. Sable kept her hands loose at her sides. The soldier at her shoulder breathed evenly. The stone floor was cold through the soles of her boots. Caelum sat the stone throne and governed. That was the only word for it. He moved through each agenda item with the particular efficiency of a man who had done this long enough that the work no longer required effort, only attention. His voice carried without being raised. His decisions were clean. Between items, his hands rested on his knees and did not move. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. Then a voice from the senior rank section, female, measured and carrying, "My lord, a point of law." The woman who rose was somewhere in her 50s, iron gray hair, the kind of posture that had been built rather than inherited. Senior rank markings, compound-based. Sable did not know her name. She would learn it later. For now, she only knew the quality of the pause that followed, the particular silence of a room that recognized a prepared attack and was waiting to see who it landed on. "The detainee," the woman said. "Sable Ashford, half-blood, border district, detained under investigative exception." She held a document. Of course she held a document. The Ashblood Decree, Section 4, Clause 2. No individual of mixed human-wolf parentage may reside within pact territory under any classification, including investigative detainment, without explicit review by full senior counsel. She let that land. "My lord!" Her voice did not sharpen. It didn't need to. "Has this council reviewed the detainment?" The room did not move. Sable kept her spine straight, her hands loose. The satchel strap was worn smooth against her palm, and she focused on that. The texture of it, the specific weight, while the woman continued. She cited the decree by section and clause, all 14 pages apparently memorized. She named Sable's father, his rank, his violation, the stripping. She named Sable's mother. She built the case the way a wall was built, one precise stone at a time, and when she finished, she asked the Alpha King directly, in front of every ranked wolf in the compound, whether he intended to uphold the law he had sworn on his wolf. The unexpected turn was this. She was smiling when she asked it. Not cruelly. Correctly. The smile of someone who had already run this calculation and knew the answer before the question left her mouth. The room waited. Sable looked at the middle distance, the far wall, the open sky above it, a strip of pale morning cloud. I know what he has to say. Caelum's voice arrived measured and final. The decree stands. The detainment is investigative exception only, reviewed by Alpha Authority as permitted under border jurisdiction law, and will be formally assessed before the 30-day threshold. A pause. The council review is noted for scheduling. He said nothing else. He did not look at her. Sable's chest registered it as a sound going out, a frequency she hadn't known she was carrying, present until it wasn't, and then the absence where it had been was its own information. She had known the answer. She had known it before he opened his mouth, had traced its logic through 14 pages of decree and 1 blood oath clause and 4 years of watching her father reduce. One knowing did not make the silence after it easier to stand in. The woman sat down. The assembly continued. Sable stood in it until it was over. She did not go back to the work table immediately. She stood in her room with her satchel still across her body and her hands flat against the stone wall, and she gave herself to the count of 30 to feel it. The specific weight of a thing that had no name because you'd decided not to name it, pressing anyway against your sternum from the inside. 30 seconds. She counted them. Then she unpacked the satchel, set her tools in their order, opened the window as far as it would go, 3 inches, marsh fog, and cold air, and let the smell of iron water and wet stone replace the close warmth of the assembly room. She knew what this became. She had seen it. She would not watch it happen to someone else from the inside. The walls went back up in the specific way she'd learned at 11, not with anger, with precision, 1 stone at a time. She was working when he came. She heard him enter. She did not turn. His presence arrived at her back the way it always did, a warmth that had nothing to do with the room's temperature, a hinge she had not asked her body to develop. "I need you to know," he said. "I know." She kept her hands moving. It doesn't help. The silence that followed had weight and texture, and she did not turn to see what it did to his face. He left. She listened for the hinge. Nothing. Cold iron, quiet room, the sound of his boots diminishing down the corridor until the stone swallowed them. The bond had gone quiet. She picked up the pestle and did not put it down again until her hands were too tired to hold it. Vesra arrived without knocking and closed the door behind her. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it exactly as it happens in your body, not what you think it means. What it feels like." Sable set down her work. Vesra's voice had a different register today, still controlled, but with the particular tension of someone carrying information they hadn't decided how to use yet. 3 days ago, Vesra said, you told me you hadn't been sleeping well. That something felt wrong, like pressure in the chest that didn't belong to you. Yes. Has it changed? Sable considered. The ache she'd first catalogued as illness had shifted over the past 4 days. Less like a single bruise, more like a map. Different locations, different qualities. One that pulled like a stretched cord. One that sat heavy and still, like waterlogged wood. One that flickered. "It's more than one," she said. Vesra was very still. "Show me." She pointed to the wall. That was how it started. Her standing in the center of her workroom, one hand extended toward the north corridor, saying there, "Something there?" It's been like that for 6 days. Constant. A strain that doesn't release. Vesra cross-referenced against the bond mapping list. A name. A notation. Bond strained, the cylinder's code had read,
and Sable had independently located it through stone walls without knowing whose it was. She pointed to 2 more. Vezra left without explaining why. She returned 40 minutes later with Caelum. He entered. All the way through the door, and all the way to the chair across the work table. The first time he had crossed her threshold. The first time the work table had been the thing between them instead of a corridor or a floor of leveled stone. He sat without asking permission. She remained standing for 1 beat, then sat across from him because the alternative was absurd. The iron sconce on the wall between them warmed immediately. Neither of them acknowledged it. "Tell me what you feel," he said. "Exactly." So she did. She described it the way she described compound reactions, precisely, without interpretation, cause and symptom separated cleanly. The locations, the textures, the way the flickering one had changed character overnight, moving from intermittent to a low, continuous pulse that she could now locate to the east wing of the compound specifically. He listened without moving, without interrupting. His hands were flat on the work table. She noticed this because it was different from before, when they had been on his knee, carefully still against himself. Here they rested open. Not relaxed. Open. He is actually listening. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he laid the bond mapping list on the table between them, turning it so she could read it, and pointed to the east wing notation. "This one," he said. "Yes. Continuous now. Since last night." His jaw tightened once. He moved his finger to the name beside the notation. She read it. The rank beside the name was Beta Level, Compound Assignment, Inner Security Rotation. The sconce burned warmer. "He's in your security circle," she said. "He runs my security rotation." Caelum's voice was level in the way that meant it was costing something to keep it there. "Has access to the compound's internal movement schedule, the patrol rotations, the gate shift changes." The room absorbed this. The architecture of it, the bond mapping list, Eli, the Eastern Lords, and now a compromised wolf inside Caelum's own perimeter, assembled in her mind with the specific clarity of a compound formula where the final element clicked into place. "It's not a military operation," she said. "No. They're using bonds as entry points, compromised pairs as leverage, your security circle from the inside." She paused. "Whoever built this has been patient." "Years," he said. The single word carried the weight of all the time he hadn't known to be watching for this. The unexpected turn arrived quietly. He reached into his jacket and placed a second document on the table. Not the bond list. A record. Older paper, the ink slightly faded. She read the heading. A Gamma rank disciplinary file. Ironmore Ascendancy. 11 years ago. Her father's name was not on it. A different name was. A different Gamma. Different violation. But the charge was identical. Unsanctioned bond across the Ashblood boundary. And beside the charge, a notation in different handwriting. Newer ink. Record queried. Eastern Lord Archive access, 8 months prior to current investigation. Someone had pulled this file recently. Had been building a precedent case, or confirming a pattern, or both. "I found it 3 days ago," Caelum said. "When I started pulling historical bond violation records." He paused. "I wasn't looking for your father's file. I want you to know that." She kept her eyes on the document, the ink, the dates. "Why show me this?" she said. "Because you've been working this investigation from your end without knowing it for a week." His voice had dropped, not in volume, but in register, something closer to its actual floor. "You've earned the full picture." The sconce between them was burning a steady copper warm, continuous. It had not flickered once during the entire conversation. She moved the document back toward him.
He didn't take it immediately. The assembly was wrong, he said. Not the law, the assembly. She looked at him then, directly, for the first time since the throne room. His face held nothing performed. No alpha composure, no managed distance. Just a man saying the true thing because the room had become a place where true things were apparently what happened. I know, she said. It doesn't change the law. No. A pause. It doesn't. He took the document. He rose. He stopped at the door. His back was to her. One hand on the frame, not quite leaving. Your father, he said. He was a gamma. Not a question. Yes, she said. He nodded once. She saw the movement in his shoulders. Then he walked into the corridor, and the door swung half-closed on its own weight behind him. The sconce did not dim. She rose from the table and crossed to it. The iron base, old and pitted, warm as skin to the touch. She wrapped her hand around it fully and held on, feeling the heat move through her palm and up into her wrist. Steady and continuous and patient. Like something that had been waiting a long time for her to stop walking past it. She held on until it cooled. It took longer than she expected. The girl on the floor was breathing wrong. Sable heard it from the corridor. Shallow, arrhythmic, the specific pattern of a system that had taken on more than it could process and was starting to stall. She moved before she knew where she was going, following the sound past 2 branching corridors, past Vezra, already crouched in an open doorway, past the threshold, and into a small room with a narrow bed and a 17-year-old on the stone floor beside it. The girl's hands were pressed flat to her chest. Her face was damp. Every few seconds, a fine tremor moved through her from sternum to fingertips, like a signal repeating through a wire that couldn't carry it. Vezra said, She collapsed 20 minutes ago. We don't know. I know, Sable said. She was already on her knees. She had her satchel open before she registered that someone else had arrived in the doorway behind her. She felt it, the warmth, the specific gravity of his presence, and filed it without turning. There was a girl on the floor, and she needed her hands. Sable had treated overload in border wolves before. Not this mechanism exactly. The omega function, the way this girl's body absorbed collective pack pain like a sponge pressed past its capacity. But the physiological pattern underneath it was familiar. A system flooded beyond its threshold. Nervous response misfiring. Pain receptors registering distress with no clear origin point. She worked through her satchel in sequence, a compound for the tremors first. Iron root suspension, pressed into the girl's palm, absorbed through the skin faster than the stomach. Then a second compound, slower acting, for the flood itself. She talked the whole time, low and continuous. Not instruction, not reassurance. Just sound, pitched to give the girl's nervous system something external to track instead of the internal noise. The tremors slowed at 4 minutes, stilled at 7. The whole time, Caelum did not move. He had entered the room and gone to one knee at the far edge, near the wall, and stayed there. Not positioned to command, not pacing, watching her work with the complete, undivided attention of a man running calculations on something he had not seen before and needed to fully understand. He trusts her hands. The girl's breathing found its rhythm. Shallow still, but even. Her face had lost the gray edge. Sable sat back on her heels. Caelum rose. He crossed to the door and spoke to Vezra quietly. Arrangements for the girl's monitoring, a healer to be posted through the night. His voice was low and specific, and he did not perform any of it. No alpha resonance, no weight of title. A man making sure a 17-year-old would not be alone. Vesra took over at the bedside. They ended up in the corridor. The torch between them burned orange gold. The stone walls held the cold of deep night. They stood at an angle to each other, not face to face. The way people stood when the conversation was going to be real, and they needed the option of looking away. He spoke first. "I don't know how to fix this without losing everything." The words arrived without preamble or performance. No lead-in, no alpha cadence, no careful legal framing. 6 words that had apparently been waiting for a corridor empty enough to say them in. Sable's chest registered it as pressure, the specific pressure of recognition. "I know," she said. "I watched my father not fix it for the same reason." He turned his head slightly, not toward her, processing. 4 years, she said. "I watched it take 4 years. And at the end of it, he was so reduced that when he died, it was almost a relief, because the diminishment was finished." She kept her voice even, factual, the way she described compound reactions. "I will not be the reason for that, not for anyone. I'm not asking you to be. You're not asking anything." She looked at the torch. "That's the problem. Neither of us is asking anything, and we are both standing in this corridor at 2 a.m. because a 17-year-old's body is registering what we're refusing to." The unexpected silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Overfull, the way the Omega's system had been overfull, pressing against its own limits. Then he said, "Tell me what you need." 4 words. She had not seen them coming, and they moved through her differently than anything he had said in 6 days of careful managed distance. She turned toward him fully for the first time since the corridor outside the assembly room. "Tell me what you can actually do," she said. "Not what the law allows, what you can do. And I'll tell you what I can do. And we start there." He held her gaze for a long moment. The scar along his jaw caught the torchlight. His hands were at his sides, open, the same way they had been on the work table. Not restraint, not performance, open. "I can open the historical record inquiry," he said, quietly, into the founding of the decree. She had not known that was possible. She kept it off her face. "I can keep feeling what I feel," she said, "and telling you where it points. Then we start there." Neither of them moved to leave. The torch burned. The corridor held its cold. Somewhere in the compound, the Omega slept, and somewhere in the east wing, a strained bond continued its low, continuous ache, and somewhere beyond the cliff walls, the marsh fog moved across black water in total indifference to all of it. Then the tone began. Not from one source, from every source, every iron bracket, every door hinge, every torch sconce in the corridor firing simultaneously, a sustained resonance that climbed to a single clear note and held it and held it and held it. 4 full seconds of every iron surface in Ashgrave vibrating with something that was not sound and not silence, but the frequency between them. Every wolf in the compound heard it. They stood in the corridor and let it happen. When it stopped, Sable looked down at her hands. The herb stains, iron root mahogany, black compound residue, the permanent dark record of her work, were glowing. Faint copper warm, pulsing once, twice, then fading back to dark, like an ember going cool. She stared at them for a long moment. "That's new," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked up. His eyes held the gold ring, full and burning, both irises lit. The first time she had seen it outside the throne room.
And he was watching her hands with an expression she had no word for, though it settled somewhere between recognition and ruin. The corridor was just a corridor again. Her hands were just her hands. But something had shifted in the architecture of the air between them, and neither of them would be able to locate the wall come morning. Something snapped in her chest at 3 a.m, and Sable was moving before she was fully awake. Not her pain. She knew her own pain. This was external. A bond fracture, clean and sudden, the specific sensation of a stretched cord finally giving way. She had felt strains before, slow and grinding. This was different. This was the sound a thing made when it broke all at once. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her satchel. The corridor outside her room was empty and dark. Torch brackets low at this hour, the stone radiating the deep cold of pre-dawn. She followed the fracture the way she followed compound reactions, tracing the signal to its source, lower and lower through the compound, past the mid-level, past the stairwell she'd never used, down into corridors where the ceiling dropped and the stone changed character. Older here, carved rather than built. She heard the boots before she saw the light. Too many. Wrong rhythm. Moving with the deliberate quiet of people who knew the patrol schedule and had planned around it. 3 of them. Eastern Lord markings under dark travel coats, visible when the nearer one's coat shifted. They had a door bar tool on the archive entrance, the heavy iron-braced door at the corridor's end, and one of them was already working the lock with the specific efficiency of someone who had been given the mechanism in advance. Sable's satchel was in her hands before her mind caught up with her hands. She knew compounds. She had spent 26 years learning what plants did to bodies in quantity. Not to harm, she had always told herself, to heal. But the difference between a compound that cleared a fever and one that dropped a man's spatial awareness to nothing was a question of concentration, not chemistry. She had 3 vials of iron mist extract in the left pocket, standard for disorientation in overloaded wolves, 3 times the border treatment dose, undiluted. She threw the first vial at the floor between them. The crack of glass. The vapor rising. The nearest soldier registered it half a second too late and went sideways into the wall, hands losing coordination, legs forgetting their instructions. The second reached for her. She was already moving, not running, no room for that in a low corridor, but low and deliberate, using the wall, getting past his reach and putting herself between them and the archive door. The third one was the problem. He was faster than the others, and he had not breathed the mist. He caught her left arm above the elbow, and the wall came up on her right side, and she heard something in her shoulder register the impact as white-hot information before she had time to process it as pain. She still had 2 vials. She broke the second one in his face. He released her. She hit the ground, shoulder first. And the pain arrived fully then, bright and specific, radiating from collarbone to wrist. She got her back against the archive door. She held the 3rd vial in her right hand and waited. Vezra's alarm voice came from 2 floors up, loud and carrying. The Gamma's emergency register, a sound that moved through stone walls like it had been designed to. Hold. Just hold. The disoriented soldiers were not advancing. The 3rd was on his knees, hands pressed to his face, the mist doing its work. The corridor filled with the sound of running boots from above. Many, close, getting closer. Then the running stopped. He was simply there. No announcement, no dramatic arrival. Caelum at the far end of the corridor with 4 soldiers behind him, taking in the scene in one sweep. The 3 incapacitated men, the sealed archive door, Sable on the floor against it with her right arm cradling her left. The unexpected turn was his face. She had seen him controlled. She had seen him managed, careful, armored with alpha composure so complete it looked like a natural feature. She had never seen this, the thing that happened to his face in the half-second before he locked it down. The rawness of it, animal and exposed. There and gone so fast she might have doubted it, except that her hands were still copper warm, and the iron door behind her spine was burning. He crossed the corridor in 5 strides and went to one knee in front of her. "Where?" he said. "Shoulder. Not broken. I need—" She stopped. He had already moved her satchel aside, already found the position of her left arm, with hands that were careful in a way that had nothing to do with being careful. He carried her. She did not argue because the shoulder made arguing complicated, and because somewhere in the compound above them, Eli was being detained, and soldiers were being processed, and the coup's machinery was grinding to its halt, and none of that required her to be standing for it. He carried her to the lower landing, and then sat down on the floor with his back against the archive door. The sealed door, the records intact, the blood oath record still inside it, and she was beside him, leaning into his shoulder because her left side had limited options and his shoulder was there. Neither of them moved to change this. Roan appeared at the corridor entrance, assessed, withdrew without speaking. The iron sconce above them burned copper warm, steady. "Eli named her," Caelum said. "The she-wolf from the assembly. She's gone, left before the alarm. The Eastern Lord's network is broken, but she's free." Sable processed this. The coup's architect, still out. "She'll regroup," Sable said. "Yes." The sconce burned. The corridor held its cold around the warmth of it. "I'm going to figure this out," he said. Not a command. Not a promise shaped for an audience. His voice at its actual floor. The register she'd heard once in a dark corridor, with a 17-year-old between them and a choice neither of them had named yet. "I know," she said. A beat, the sconce, the old iron door at their backs, holding everything it had been built to hold. "I believe you this time," she said. His shoulder did not move, but something in it changed. A release, microscopic, the specific relaxation of a held thing finally permitted to rest. The archive door was warm against her spine. Above them, Ashgrave moved through the dark with the sounds of a coup being dismantled. Below them, the bond burned steady, and neither of them told it to stop. Vezra came to her door and said, "There's an assembly. You weren't invited. I thought you should know it's happening." Then she left. Sable stood in the center of her workroom with her right hand still wrapped around her grinding pestle and her left arm in a cloth brace, and tried to read what Vezra's face had not said. Something was in motion. Something that had started in the last 24 hours, in the silence since the lower corridor. Since Caelum had risen from the archive floor and handed her to a healer and disappeared into the compound's upper levels and not come back down. She had not expected him to come back down. She had told herself this clearly, several times, in the specific tone she used for things that needed to be true before they were. She went to the window. The open sky throne room was 3 floors above her, and she could not hear it. But she could feel the compound's weight change, a collective shift in pressure, like a held breath taken all at once by something very large. Whatever was happening, it had the whole pack's attention. She did not move from the window for 40 minutes. The marsh fog had cleared overnight. For the first time since her arrival, she could see the black water all the way to the tree line, the sideways grown shapes of the border pines, the rust-red cliff edge
where Ashgrave ended and open sky began. It looked like the border. It looked like every edge she had ever stood at and decided to stay on the safe side of. You have never once been on the safe side. The compound's pressure shifted again, the assembly breaking, boots on stone above her, voices moving through corridors, the particular quality of sound that followed something significant, not chaos, not celebration, something more complicated than either. Vezra arrived 12 minutes later. She came in without knocking, the way she had the morning she'd explained blood oath biology. Her hands were at her sides. Her face held the careful neutrality of a woman controlling something that wanted to be larger. He suspended the decree, Vezra said. Sable's hand went flat against the window frame. The iron was cold. Just cold. The Ashblood Decree, Vezra said, pending full inquiry into its founding record. He presented the historical gaps to full court assembly under Gamma challenge. The blood oath is technically intact. The inquiry suspends the decree, but doesn't void the oath record. She paused. His wolf is safe. The cold of the window frame moved up through Sable's palm and into her wrist, and she let it. He didn't have to do it that way, she said. No. Vezra's voice held something that wasn't warmth exactly, but was adjacent to it. He chose to. The unexpected weight of it arrived then. Not relief. Something with more texture than relief. Something that pressed against the backs of her eyes and required 3 slow breaths to contain. He had not done it quietly. He had not done it in a back corridor with paperwork and legal maneuvering. He had stood in the open sky room under the moon in front of his full pack and said, "This law may have been built on a lie, and I am not willing to uphold a lie." He had chosen the harder shape of the right thing. She had not known, until this moment, how much she had stopped expecting that from anyone. He came 2 hours later. He crossed the threshold fully. No doorframe positioning, no careful distance. He walked into her workroom the way he'd walked into it the morning of the investigation, direct and deliberate. And he stopped close enough that the iron thread came alive between them, steady and continuous. The sconce on the wall warming to copper gold without being asked. He did not speak immediately. She waited. Her hands were at her sides. The brace on her left arm was a white strip against her skin. On the work table behind her, half buried under compound materials, was the small copper ring, imperfect, hammered, warm-toned against the gray stone. She had carried it in her satchel since the marshal's assessment of her belongings at the gate. No one had asked about it. No one had taken it. She had not examined why she'd kept it close. "I'm not asking you to stay because of the bond," he said. "I know," she said. His jaw tightened once. Not anger. The effort of saying the true thing in the right order. "The inquiry will take months. The suspension holds the legal space, but it doesn't resolve it. I can't promise you a clean ending." "I'm not asking for one." "I know." A pause. The iron thread hummed between them, low and continuous, the sound beneath sound. "I'm asking because I want you to." 6 words, the same weight as 6 months of careful managed distance, said plainly in a workroom that smelled of iron root and marsh air from a 3-inch window, told by a man who had spent 24 hours choosing justice over survival and come to her door with nothing left to hide behind. She turned to the work table. She found the ring without having to search. Her hand went to it directly, the copper warm against her fingers even in the cool air, the imperfect surface of it familiar in a way that had no logical explanation. She had never held it before today. She had held it all her life. She turned back and placed it in his open palm. His hand closed around it. The copper warmed further. She could feel the heat from where she stood, radiating through the space between them. And the sconce doubled its light, and the air between them was thick with it, the iron thread resonating at a frequency that was not sound, but filled the room like sound. He did not move. She did not move.
The workroom held them in its stillness. The marsh was visible through the window. Black water, open sky, the rust-red cliff edge catching the last of the day's amber light. The room smelled of compound work and old stone, and the particular warmth of iron that had been burning for 20 minutes because two people were standing too close for it to do anything else. He was still holding the ring. She was still close enough to feel it. The sconce burned between them, steady and patient, the way it had been burning since the first morning in the throne room, waiting for them to stop pretending they couldn't see it. Neither of them pretended now. The ring sat in his palm, warm as a pulse, small as a beginning. She looked up at him, and he was already looking at her, and the distance between them was no longer a wall. It was just distance. And distance, she was learning, could be crossed. She found the she-wolf before Caelum's soldiers did. Not by tracking, not by intelligence report or patrol sweep. She found her the way she found everything now, through the network of bonds that lived in her chest like a second circulatory system, reading pressure and pain and manipulation, the way her hands read compound reactions. 3 days after the lower corridor, 4 days after the suspension of the decree, Sable pressed her palm to the workroom wall at dawn and felt the she-wolf's signature like a bruise in the air due north. Distinct, recognizable, the specific frequency of a bond that had been deliberately fractured in others, over and over, by the same hand. She went to Roan directly. Not Vezra. Not Caelum. Roan. No, because Roan dealt in logistics, and she had a location, and needed someone who would move on it without a committee. He looked at her for one long second. Then he assembled a unit. She went with them. They found the she-wolf in a border way station 2 hours north, a supply cache built into the cliff base used for patrol rotations off the main maps. She had not fled far. She had been waiting, Sable understood, for the inquiry to stall, for the pack to fracture on its own without her hand visible in it. She had miscalculated what Sable was. The way station held 4 people: the she-wolf, 2 Eastern Lord contacts, and a young compound wolf Sable recognized from the bond mapping list. Bond-strained, leveraged, used. He was sitting in the corner with the specific posture of someone who had not slept in days and knew the shape of the mistake they were inside. Roan's soldiers handled the Eastern Lord contacts. Sable handled the she-wolf. She stood in the center of that low stone room, and she named every bond the woman had fractured. Every wolf she had leveraged. Every pair she had strained until the weakest link gave. She named them by the sensation she had carried for weeks in her own chest. The pulled cord, the waterlogged weight, the flicker, and matched each one to a face, a name, a rank. This is what I am. This is what I have always been. The she-wolf's composure held for the first 2 names. By the 5th, it had a different texture. By the 9th, she was very still in the way that meant there was nothing left to hide behind. She had no defense against being known. Roan made the arrest. The compound wolf in the corner rose on his own and walked to the soldiers without being asked. Outside, the cliff face caught the morning light. Rust red and gray-black, warm in the early sun for the first time since Sable had arrived. The unexpected thing was this. On the transport back, the ache in Sable's chest began to clear. Bond by bond. A loosening, like a fist opening slowly,
as the manipulated network found its way back to its own frequency without the interference running through it. She felt the Omega's bond strengthen from miles away, a warmth that moved through her sternum and kept going, clean and continuous. She pressed her hand flat to her chest and let it. Vezra brought the dress that evening without explaining how she'd known to bring it. Deep rust red, the color of the cliffstone. Heavy linen, well made, nothing ceremonial about the cut. Functional and deliberate, the kind of clothing that said, "I am here on purpose." Sable put it on. She took her hair down. She did not look for something to pin it back with. The assembly was already gathered when she arrived at the throne room entrance. She could hear Caelum's voice inside. Not the words, the register. The actual floor of him, the voice he used when there was nothing left to manage. She had learned the difference. She walked in. The pack watched her cross the floor. Not with hostility, with the particular attention of a group of people whose biology had been registering her for 3 weeks and was now being asked to resolve what it already knew. Caelum stood at the front. He turned when she entered. The iron thread fired the moment their eyes met. Not a pulse, not a glow, a full detonation of every iron surface in the room simultaneously. A wave of copper-warm heat that moved from the door hinges to the throne brackets to the soldiers' clasps and kept going, out through the walls and into the compound beyond. Every wolf in the building felt it in their back teeth. The pack was very still. Caelum did not look away from her. "The iron thread," he said, to the room, to the open sky above them, to the moon not yet visible in the pale evening overhead. "Witnessed here, 3 weeks past, and witnessed now." His voice carried the full alpha register, not because he was performing it, but because it was simply what happened when he stopped holding it back. "Sable Ashford, my mate." Not a question, not a decree, a fact, stated under open sky, at full volume, with his whole pack as witness. She walked to him, not quickly, not tentatively. The rust-red dress moved with her, the marsh air coming through the open ceiling, lifting the edges of her hair, the iron floor warm through the soles of her boots with every step. She was not walking toward rescue. She was not being summoned. She was arriving at a place she had been moving toward since a gate hinge burned under her palm 3 weeks ago, and she had filed it, wrongly, under exhaustion. She stopped beside him. The wolf came up through her like a tide, not violent, not crisis-driven, arising, her own animal nature dormant and patient, meeting the open sky and the iron warmth and the frequency of his bond beside her, and deciding finally that this was a place worth being. She felt it move through her hands first. The herb stains glowed copper and held and did not fade. Every iron surface in Ashgrave rang. The sound moved out through the cliff walls and across the black water and into the marsh and kept going until it reached the border. And every wolf between here and the edge of Ironmoor territory felt it land in their chest like a note they had been waiting to hear completed. The assembly cleared slowly. They stood in the empty room. The moon had risen, directly overhead, framed by the 4 walls of old stone, luminous and indifferent and present. The iron walls held their warmth. The open ceiling held the night. He had the copper ring. She could see it in his closed hand. That small, imperfect circle. Warm-toned, even in moonlight. The oldest honest thing between them. She did not look at her hands. She knew what they looked like. Herb-stained, marked by work, amber glowing at the edges where the bond ran closest to the surface. She did not need to check them. She knew what they were for.
The marsh was visible at the cliff's edge. Black water, open distance. The border she had lived beside for 4 years and would not be living beside anymore. She looked up. He looked up. The moon held them both in its old, patient light, and the iron walls breathed warm around them, and the ring waited in his hand like a question already answered. She had arrived.